Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another reading stream. I'm just, uh, I wanted to say thank you, Thomas, for stopping in, being number one. And it's really nice to see you pop in. and yeah, so I'm just going to go right in. I'm only going to aim for an hour today, but I think we can get a lot done. It's picking up steam in this book. We still haven't gotten to the Malcolm effect, but I believe it will occur very soon. The park. A faint crackling sound like fire in a fireplace. Something warm and wet tickled Grant's ankle. He opened his eyes and saw an enormous beige head. The head tapered to a flat mouth shaped like the bill of a duck. The eyes protruding above the flat duck bill were gentle and soft like a cow's. The duck mouth opened and chewed branches on the limb where Grant was sitting. He saw large flat teeth in the cheek. The warm lips touched his ankle again as the animal chewed. The duck-billed hadrosaur. He was astonished to see it up close. Not that he was afraid. All the species of duck-billed dinosaurs were herbivores, and this one acted exactly like a cow. Even though it was huge, its manner was so calm and peaceful, Grant didn't feel threatened. He stayed where he was on the branch, careful not to move, and watched as it ate. The reason Grant was astonished was that he had a propriety feeling about this animal. It was probably a myosaur from the late Cretaceous in Montana. With John Horner, Grant had been the first to describe the species. Myosaurs had an upcurved lip which gave them the appearance of smiling. The name meant good mother lizard. Myosaurs were thought of to protect their eggs until the babies were born and could take care of themselves. Grant heard an insistent chirping, and the big head swung down. He moved just enough to see the baby hadrosaur scampering around at the feet of the adult. The baby was dark beige with black spots. The adult bent her head low to the ground and waited, unmoving while the baby stood up on its hind legs, resting its front legs on its mother's jaw, and ate the branches that protruded from the side of its mother's mouth. The mother waited patiently until the baby had finished eating, and dropped back down to all fours again. Then the big head came back up toward Grant. Well, hello, Bone Kitty. It's nice to see you. Happy Sunday evening to you. I'm only going to be reading until 9 or midnight if you're on the East Coast. Somewhere in between, you could do the math. But thanks for stopping by. It's always nice to see you. Let's see. The hadrosaur continued to eat just a few feet from him. Grant looked at the two elongated air holes at the top of the flat upper bill. Apparently, the dinosaur couldn't smell Grant, and even though the left eye was looking straight at him, for some reason, the hadrosaur didn't react to him. He remembered how the tyrannosaur had failed to see him the previous night. Grant decided on an experiment. He coughed. Instantly, the hadrosaur froze. The big head suddenly still, the jaws no longer chewing. Only the eye moved, looking for the source of the sound. Then, after a moment, when there seemed to be no danger, the animal resumed chewing. Amazing, Grant thought. Sitting in his arms, Lex opened her eyes and said, "Hey, what's that?" The hadrosaur trumpeted in alarm, a loud resonant honk that so startled Lex that she nearly fell out of the tree. The hadrosaur pulled its head away from the branch and trumpeted again. "Don't make her mad," Tim said from the branch above. The baby chirped and scurried beneath the mother's legs as the hadrosaur stepped away from the tree. The mother cocked her head and peered inquisitively at the branch where Grant and Lex were sitting. With his upturned smiling lips, the dinosaur had a comical appearance. "Is it dumb?" Lex said. "No," Grant said. "You just surprised her." "Well," Lex said, "is she going to let us get down or what?" The hadrosaur had backed 10 feet away from the tree. She honked again. Grant had the impression she was trying to frighten them away, but the dinosaur didn't really seem to know what to do. She acted confused and uneasy. They waited in silence, and after a minute, the Hargesaur approached the branch again, jaws moving in anticipation. She was clearly going to resume eating. Forget it, Lex said. I'm not staying here. She started to climb down the branches. At her movement, the Hargesaur trumpeted in fresh alarm. Grant was amazed. He thought, it really can't see us when we don't move. And after a minute, it literally forgets that we're here. Hey, Jeremy. You're getting around tonight. I think everybody is. Thank you for stopping by. It's nice to see you in another stream. And I'm not ignoring you, so hey, bonus points. This was just like the Tyrannosaur, another classic example of an amphibian visual cortex. Studies of frogs had shown that amphibians only saw moving things like insects. If something didn't move, they literally didn't see it. The same thing seemed to be true to dinosaurs. In any case, the Myosaur now seemed to find these strange creatures climbing down the tree too upsetting. With a final honk, she nudged her baby and lumbered slowly away. She paused once and looked back at them, then continued on. They reached the ground. Lex shook herself off. Both children were covered in a layer of fine dust. All around them, the grass had been flattened. There were streaks of blood and a sour smell. Grant looked at his watch. We better get going, kids, he said. Not me, Lex said. I'm not walking out there any more. We have to. Why? Because, Grant said, we have to tell them about the boat. Since they can't seem to see us on the motion sensors, we have to go all the way back ourselves. It's the only way. Why can't we take the raft? Tim said. What raft? Tim pointed to the low concrete maintenance building with the bars where they had spent the night. It was 20 yards away, across the field. I saw a raft back there, he said. Grant immediately understood the advantages. It was now 7 o'clock in the morning. They had at least 8 miles to go. If they could take a raft along the river, that would make that would make much faster progress than going over land. Let's do it, Grant said. Arnold punched the visual search mode and watched as the monitors began to scan throughout the park, the images changing every 2 seconds. It was tiring to watch, but it was the fastest way to find Nedry's jeep, and Muldoon had been adamant about that. He had gone out with Gennaro to look at the stampede, but now that it was daylight, he wanted the car found. He wanted the weapons. His intercom clicked. Mr. Arnold, may I have a word with you, please? It was Hammond. He sounded like the voice of God. You want to come here, Mr. Hammond? No, Mr. Arnold, Hammond said. Come to me. I'm in the genetics lab with Dr. Wu. We'll be waiting for you. Arnold sighed and stepped away from the screens. Grant stumbled deep in the gloomy recesses of the building. He pushed past 5-gallon containers of herbicide, tree pruning equipment, spare tires for a jeep, coils of cyclone fencing, 100-pound fertilizer bags, stacks of brown ceramic insulators, empty motor oil cans, work lights, and cables. I don't see any raft. Keep going. Bags of concrete, lengths of copper rope, green mesh, and 2 plastic oars hung on clips on the concrete wall. Okay, he said, but where's the raft? It must be here somewhere, Tim said. You never saw a raft? No, I just assumed it was here. Poking among the junk, Grant found no raft, but he did find a set of plans, rolled up and speckled with mold from humidity, stuck back in a metal cabinet on the wall. He spread the plans on the floor, brushing away a big spider. He looked at them for a long time. I'm hungry. Just a minute. They were detailed topographical charts for the main area of the island, where they now were. According to this, the lagoon narrowed into the river they had seen earlier, which twisted northward, right through the aviary, and on within a half-mile of the visitor lodge. He flipped back through the pages. How to get to the lagoon? According to the plans, there should be a door at the back building they were in. Grant looked up and saw it, recessed back in the concrete wall. The door was wide enough for a car. Opening it, he saw a paved road running straight down toward the lagoon. The road was dug below ground level, so it couldn't be seen from above. It must be another service road, and it led to a dock at the edge of the lagoon, and clearly stenciled on the dock was raft storage. Hey, Tim said, look at this. He held out a metal case to Grant. Opening it, Grant found a compressed air pistol in a cloth belt that held darts. There were 6 darts in all, each as thick as his finger, labeled Morrow 709. Good work, Tim. He slung the belt around his shoulder and stuck the gun in his trousers. Is it a tranquilizer gun? I'd say so. What about the boat? Lex said. I think it's on the dock, Grant said. They started down the road. Grant carried the oars on his shoulder. I hope it's a big raft, Lex said, because I can't swim. Don't worry, he said. Maybe we can catch some fish, she said. They walked down the road with the sloping embankment rising up on both sides of them. They heard a deep, rhythmic snorting sound, but Grant could not see where it was coming from. Are you sure there's a raft down here? Lex said, wrinkling her nose. Probably, Grant said. The rhythmic snorting became louder as they walked, but they also heard a steady, droning, buzzing sound. When they reached the end of the road, at the end of the small concrete dock, Grant froze in shock. The Tyrannosaur was right here. It was sitting upright in the shade of a tree, its hind legs stretched out in front. Its eyes were open, but it was not moving, except for its head, which lifted and fell gently with each snorting sound. The buzzing came from the cloud of flies that surrounded it, crawling over its face and slack jaws, its bloody fangs and the red haunch of a killed hadrosaur that lay on its side beside the Tyrannosaur. The Tyrannosaur was only 20 yards away. Grant felt sure it must have seen him, but the big animal did not respond. It just sat there. It took him a moment to realize that the Tyrannosaur was asleep, sitting up, but asleep. He signaled to Tim and Lex to say where they were. Grant walked slowly forward onto the dock, in full view of the Tyrannosaur. The big animal continued to sleep, snoring soundly. Near the end of the dock, a wooden shed was painted green to blend with the foliage. Grant quietly unlatched the door and looked inside. He saw a half-dozen orange life vests hanging on the wall, several rolls of wire mesh fencing, some coils of rope, and 2 big rubber coils sitting on the floor. The cubes were strapped tight with flat rubber belts. Rafts. He looked back at Lex. She mouthed, no boat. He nodded, yes. The Tyrannosaur raised his forelimb to swipe at flies buzzing around its snout, but otherwise it did not move. Grant pulled one of the cubes out onto the dock. It was surprisingly heavy. He freed the straps, found the inflation cylinder. With the loud hiss, the rubber began to expand. Then with the hiss whap, it popped fully open on the dock. The sound was fearfully loud in their ears. Grant turned, stared up at the dinosaur. The Tyrannosaur grunted and snorted. It began to move. Grant braced himself to run, but the animal shifted its ponderous bulk, and then it settled back against the tree trunk and gave a long, growling belch. Lex looked disgusted, waving her hand in front of her face. Grant was soaked in sweat from the tension. He dragged the rubber raft across the dock. It flopped into the water with a loud splash. The dinosaur continued to sleep. Grant tied the boat up to the dock and returned to the shed to take out 2 life preservers. He put these on the boat and then waved for the kids to come onto the dock. Pale with fear, Lex waved back, no. He gestured, yes. The Tyrannosaur continued to sleep. Grant stabbed in the air with an emphatic finger. Lex came silently, and he gestured for her to get into the raft. Then Tim got in, and they both put on their life vests. Grant got in and pushed off. The raft drifted silently out into the lagoon. Grant picked up his paddles and fitted them into the oarlocks. They moved farther from the dock. Lex sat back and sighed loudly with relief. Then she looked stricken and put her hand over her mouth. Her body shook with muffled sounds. She was suppressing a cough. She always coughed at the wrong times. Lex, Tim whispered fiercely. looking back towards the shore. She shook her head miserably and pointed to her throat. He knew what she meant. A tickle in her throat. What she needed was a drink of water. Grant was rowing, and Tim leaned over the side of the raft and scooped his hand in the lagoon, holding his cupped hand towards her. Lex coughed loudly, explosively. In Tim's ears, the sound echoed across the water like a gunshot. The tyrannosaur yawned lazily and scratched behind its ear with its hind foot. Then, like a dog, it yawned again. It was groggy in its big meal, and it woke up slowly. On the boat, Lex was making little gargling sounds. Lex, shut up, Tim said. I can't help it, she whispered. And then she coughed again. Grant rowed harder, moving the raft powerfully into the center of the lagoon. On the shore, the tyrannosaur stumbled to its feet. I couldn't help it, Timmy, Lex shrieked miserably. I couldn't help it. Shh. Grant was rowing as fast as he could. Anyway, it doesn't matter, she said. We're far enough away he can't swim. Of course he can swim, you little idiot, Tim shouted at her. On the shore, the tyrannosaur stepped off the dock and plunged into the water. It moved strongly into the lagoon after them. Well, how should I know, she said. Everybody knows tyrannosaurs can swim. It's in all of the books. Anyway, all reptiles can swim. Snakes can't. Of course snakes can, you idiot. Settle down, Grant said. Hold on to something. Grant was watching the tyrannosaur, noticing how the animal swam. The tyrannosaur was now chest deep in the water, but it could hold its big head high above the surface. Then Grant realized the animal wasn't swimming. It was walking, because moments later, only the very top of the head, the eyes and nostrils protruded above the surface. By then it looked like a crocodile, and it swam like a crocodile, swinging its big tail back and forth so the water churned behind it. Behind the head, Grant saw the hump of its back and the ridges along the length of the tail, and it occasionally broke the surface. Exactly like a crocodile, he thought unhappily. The biggest crocodile in the world. Ooh, this is exciting, isn't it? Ooh. I'm sorry, Dr. Grant, Lex wailed. I didn't mean it. Grant glanced over his shoulder. The lagoon was no more than 100 yards wide here, and they'd almost reached the center. If he continued, the water would become shallow again. The tyrannosaur would be able to walk again, and he would move faster in shallow water. Grant swung the boat around and began to row north. What are you doing? The tyrannosaur was now just a few yards away. Grant could hear its sharp, snorting breaths as it came closer. Grant looked at the paddles in his hands, but they were light plastic, not weapons at all. The tyrannosaur threw its head back and opened its jaws wide, showing rows of curved teeth, and then its great muscular spasm lunged forward to the raft, just missing the rubber gunwale. The huge skulls slapping down, the raft rocking away on the crest of the splash. The tyrannosaur sank below the surface, leaving gurgling bubbles. The lagoon was still. Lex gripped the gunwale handles and looked back. Did he drown? No, Grant said. He saw bubbles, then a faint ripple along the surface, coming toward the boat. Hang on, he shouted, as the head bucked up beneath the rubber, bending the boat and lifting it into the air, spinning them crazily before it splashed down again. Do something, Alexis screamed. Do something. Grant pulled the air pistol out of his belt. It looked pitifully small in his hand, but there was the chance that, if he shot the animal in a sensitive spot, in the eye or the nose, the tyrannosaur surfaced beside the boat, opening its jaws and roared. Grant aimed and fired. The dart flashed in the light and smacked into the cheek. The tyrannosaur shook its head and roared again, and suddenly they heard an answering roar floating across the water towards them. Looking back, Grant saw the juvenile T-Rex on the shore, crouched over the killed sauropod, claiming the kill as its own. The juvenile slashed at the carcass, then raised the head high and bellowed. The big tyrannosaur saw it too, and the response was immediate. It turned back and to protect its kill, swimming strongly towards the shore. It's going away, Lex squealed, clapping her hands. He's going away. Na-na-na-na-na, stupid dinosaur. From the shores, the juvenile roared defiantly. Enraged, the big tyrannosaur burst from the lagoon at full speed, water streaming from its enormous body as it raced up the hill past the dock. The juvenile ducked its head and fled, its jaws still filled with ragged flesh. The big tyrannosaur chased it, racing past the dead sauropod, disappearing over the hill. They heard its final threatening bellow, and then the raft moved to the north, around a bend in the lagoon, to the river. Exhausted from rowing, Grant collapsed back, his chest heaving. He couldn't catch his breath. He lay gasping in the raft. Are you okay, Dr. Grant? Lex asked. From now on, will you just do what I tell you? Okay, she sighed, as if it had just made the most unreasonable demand in the world. She trailed her arm in the water for a while. You stopped rowing, she said. I'm tired, Grant said. Then how come we're still moving? Grant sat up. She was right. The raft drifted steadily north. There must be a current. The current was carrying them north towards the hotel. He looked at his watch and was astonished to see it was 15 minutes past 7. Only 15 minutes had passed since he had last looked at his watch. It seemed like 2 hours. Grant lay back against the rubber gunwales, closed his eyes, and slept. The fifth iteration. Flaws in the system will now become severe. Quote Ian Malcolm. The search. Gennaro sat in the Jeep and listened to the buzzing of the flies and stared at the distant palm trees wavering in the heat. He was astonished by what looked like a battleground. The grass was trampled flat for 100 yards in every direction. One big palm tree was uprooted from the ground. There was great washes of blood in the grass, and on the rocky outcropping to the right. Sitting beside him, Muldoon said, No doubt about it, Rexy's been among the Hadrosaurs. He looked around. He took another drink of whiskey and capped the bottle. Damn lot of flies, he said. They waited and watched. Gennaro drummed his fingers on the dashboard. What are we waiting for? Muldoon didn't answer immediately. The Rex is out there somewhere, he said, squinting at the landscape in the morning sun. And we don't have any weapons worth a damn. We're in a jeep. Oh, he can outrun in the jeep, Mr. Gennaro, Muldoon said, shaking his head. Once we leave this road and go onto open terrain, the best we can do is a four-wheel drive. The best we can do in a four-wheel drive is 30, 40 miles an hour. He'll run us right down, no problem for it. Muldoon sighed, but I don't see much movement out there now. You ready to live dangerously? Hey, Black Samurai. Happy Sunday to you. Appreciate you stopping by. Muldoon and Gennaro are out in the field doing searchy stuff. I like that they're both still alive. Muldoon started the engine, and at the sudden sound, two small Unaphilians leapt up from the matted grass directly ahead. Muldoon put the car in gear. He drove in a wide circle around the trampled side, and then moved inward, driving in decreasing concentric circles until they finally came to the place in the field where the little Athelians had been. Then he got out and walked forward in the grass away from the jeep. He stopped as a dense cloud of flies lifted into the air. What is it? Gennaro called. Bring the radio, Muldoon said. Gennaro climbed out of the jeep and hurried forward. Even from a distance he could smell the sour, sweet odor of early decay. He saw a dark shape in the grass, crusted with blood, legs askew. Young Hadrosaur, Muldoon said, staring down at the carcass. The whole herd stampeded, and the young one got separated, and the T-Rex brought it down. How do you know? Gennaro said. The flesh was ragged from many bites. You can tell from the etc. Muldoon said. See those chalky white bits there in the grass? That's hydrospore. Uh, uric acid makes it white. But look there. He pointed to a large mound rising knee-high in the grass. That's Tyrannosaur spore. How do you know that the Tyrannosaur didn't come later? The bite patterns, Muldoon said. See those little ones there? He pointed around the belly. Those are from the othes. Those bites haven't bled. Those are post-mortem. From scavengers. Othes did that. But the hardro was brought down by a bite on the neck. You see the big slash there above the shoulder blades? That's the T-Rex, no question. Gennaro bent over the carcass, staring at the awkward, trampled limbs with a sense of unreality. Beside him, Muldoon flicked on the radio. Control. Yes, John Arnold said over the radio. We've got another hardro dead, juvenile. Muldoon bent down among the flies and checked the skin on the sole of the right foot. A number was tattooed there. Specimen is number HD09. The radio crackled. I've got something for you, Arnold said. Oh, what's that? I found Nedry. The jeep burst through the line of palm trees along the east road and came out into a narrower service road leading towards the Jungle River. It was hot in the area of the park, and the jungle close and fetid around them. Muldoon was fiddling with the computer monitor in the jeep, which now showed a map of the resort with overlaid grid lines. They found him up on the remote video, he said. Sector 104, just ahead. Farther up the road, Gennaro saw a concrete barrier, and the jeep parked alongside it. He must have taken the wrong turnoff, Muldoon said. The little bastard. What did he take? Gennaro asked. Wu says 15 embryos. Know what that's worth? Gennaro shook his head. Somewhere between 2 and 10 million, Muldoon said. He shook his head. Big stakes. As they came closer, Gennaro saw the body lying beside the car. The body was indistinct and green, but the green shape scattered away as the jeep pulled to a stop. Compies, Muldoon said. The compies found him. A dozen promphisophagnathes, delicate little predators, no larger than ducks, stood at the edge of the jungle, chittering excitedly as the men climbed out of the car. Dennis Nedry lay on his back, the chubby boyish face now red and bloated. Flies buzzed around the gaping mouth and thick tongue. His body was mangled, the intestines torn open, one leg chewed through. Gennaro turned away quickly to look at the little compies, which squatted on their hind legs a short distance away and watched the men curiously. The little dinosaurs had 5-fingered hands, he noticed. They wiped their faces and chins, giving them an eerily human quality which, I'll be damned, Muldoon said. Wasn't the compies. What? Muldoon was shaking his head. See these blotches on his shirt and his face? Smell that sweet smell like old dried vomit? Gennaro rolled his eyes. He smelled it. That's Dilo saliva, Muldoon said. Spit from the Dilophosaurus. You see the damage around the cornea, all that redness? In the eyes, it's painful but not fatal. You've got about 2 hours to wash it out with the antivenom. We keep it all around the park just in case. Not that it mattered to this bastard. They blinded him, then ripped him down the middle. Not a nice way to go. Maybe there's justice in the world after all. Yeah, I know, Bun. They're making it really hard. And every time I think I get past it, they have to come and bring it back. Can't they just call them the compies? No, they cannot. They have to call them whatever that giant word is. If we're comphisophic and I know I'm killing that word every time I say it. Speak of the devil, the compies squeaked and hopped up and down as Gennaro opened the back door and took out gray metal tubing in a stainless steel case. It's all still here, he said. He handed 2 dark cylinders to Gennaro. What are these? Gennaro said. Just what they look like, Muldoon said. Rockets. As Gennaro backed away, he said, Watch it, you don't want to step in something. Gennaro stepped carefully over Nedry's body. Muldoon carried the tubing to the other jeep and placed it in the back. He climbed behind the wheel. Let's go. What about him? Gennaro said, pointing to the body. What about him? Muldoon said. We've got things to do. He put the car in gear, looking back. Gennaro saw the compies resume their feeding. One jumped up and squatted on Nedry's open mouth as it nibbled the flesh of his nose. Classy. The jungle river became narrower. The banks closed in on both sides until the trees and foliage overhanging the banks met high above the block on the sun. The block out the sun. Tim heard the cry of birds and saw small chirping dinosaurs leaping among the branches, but mostly it was silent, the air hot and still beneath the canopy of trees. Grant looked at his watch. It was 8 o'clock. They drifted along peacefully among dappled patches of light. If anything, they seemed to be moving faster than before. Awake now, Grant lay on his back and stared up at the branches overhead. In the bow, he saw her reaching up. Hey, what's up? Oh, sorry. Hey, what are you doing? He said. You think we can eat these berries? She pointed to the trees. Some of the overhanging branches were close enough to touch. Tim saw clusters of bright red berries on the branches. No, Grant said. Why? Those little dinosaurs are eating them. He pointed to the small dinosaurs. She pointed to the small dinosaurs, scampering in the branches. No, Lex. She sighed, dissatisfied with his authority. I wish Daddy was here, she said. Daddy always knows what to do. What are you talking about? Tim said. He never knows what to do. Yes, he does, she sighed. Lex stared at the trees as they slid past their big roots, twisting towards the water's edge. Just because you're not his favorite. Tim turned away and said nothing. But don't worry, Daddy likes you too, even if you're into computers and not sports. Dad's a real sports nut. Dad is a real sports nut, Tim explained to Grant. Grant nodded. Up in the branches, small, pale yellow dinosaurs, barely 2 feet tall, hopped from tree to tree. They had beaky heads like parrots. You know what they call those? Tim said. Microceratops. Big deal, Lex said. I thought you might be interested. Only very young boys, she said, are interested in dinosaurs. Says who? Daddy. Tim started to yell, but Grant raised his hand. Kids, he said, shut up. Why? Lex said. I could do what I want if I... Then she felt silent, because she heard it too. It was a blood-curdling shriek from somewhere downriver. Well, where the hell is the damn Rex? Muldoon said, talking to the radio. Because we don't see him here. They were back at the sauropod compound, looking out at the trampled grass where the Hadrosaurus had stampeded. The Tyrannosaur was nowhere to be found. Checking now, Arnold said, and clicking off. Muldoon turned to Gennaro. Checking now, he repeated sarcastically. Why the hell didn't he check before? Why didn't he keep track of him? I don't know, Gennaro said. He's not showing up, Arnold said a moment later. What do you mean he's not showing up? He's not on the monitors. Motion sensors aren't finding him. Hell, Muldoon said. So much for the motion sensors. You see Grant and the kids? Motion sensors aren't finding them either. Well, what are we supposed to do now? Muldoon said. Wait, Arnold said. Look. Directly ahead, the big dome of the aviary rose above them. Grant had seen it only from a distance. Now he realized it was enormous, 1/4 mile in diameter or more. The pattern of geodesic struts shone dully through the light mist, and his first thought was that the glass must weigh a ton. Then as they came closer, he saw that there wasn't any glass, just struts. A thin mesh hung inside the elements. It isn't finished, Lex said. I think it's meant to be open like that, Grant said. Then all the birds can fly out. Not if they're big birds, Grant said. The river carried them beneath the edge of the dome. They stared upward. Now they were inside the dome, still drifting down the river. But within minutes, the dome was so high above them that it was hardly visible in the mist. Grant said, I seem to remember there was a second lodge here. Moments later, he saw the roof of a building over the tops of the trees to the north. You want to stop? Tim said. Maybe there's a phone or motion sensors. Grant steered towards the shore. We need to try to contact the control room. It's getting late. They clambered out, slipping on the muddy bank, and Grant hauled the raft out of the water. Then he tied the rope to the tree, and they set off through a dense forest of palm trees. Gotta stay hydrated here. Let's see. The aviary. I just don't understand, John Arnold said, speaking into the phone. I don't see the Rex. I don't see Grant and the kids anywhere either. He sat in front of the consoles and gulped another cup of coffee. All around him, the control room was strewn with paper plates and half-eaten sandwiches. Arnold was exhausted. It was 8 a.m. on Saturday. In the 14 hours since Nedry destroyed the computers that ran Jurassic Park, Arnold had patiently pulled systems back online, one after another. All the park systems are back and functioning correctly. The phones are working. I've called for a doctor for you. On the other end of the line, Malcolm coughed. Arnold was talking to him in his room at the lodge. But you're having trouble with the motion sensors. Well, I'm not finding what I'm looking for. Like the Rex? He's not reading at all now. He started north about 20 minutes ago, following along the edge of the lagoon, and then I lost him. I don't know why, unless he's gone to sleep again. And you can't find Grant and the kids? No. I think it's quite simple, Malcolm said. The motion sensors cover an inadequate area. Inadequate, Arnold bristled. They cover 92% of the land area. I remember, Malcolm said, but if you put the remaining areas up on a board, I think you find that the 8% is topographically unified, meaning that those areas are contiguous. In essence, an animal can move freely anywhere in the park and escape detection by following a maintenance road or the jungle river or the beaches or whatever. Even if that were so, Arnold said, the animals are too stupid to know that. It's not clear how stupid the animals are, Malcolm said. You think that's what Grant and the kids are doing? Arnold said. Definitely not, Malcolm said, copying again. Grant's no fool. He clearly wants to be detected by you. He and the kids are probably waving at every motion sensor in sight. But maybe they have other problems we don't know about. Or maybe they're on the river. I can't imagine they'd be on the river. The banks are very narrow. It's impossible to walk along there. Would the river bring them all the way back here? Yes, but it's not the safest way to go because it passes through the aviary. Why wasn't the aviary on the tour? Malcolm said. We've had problems setting it up. Originally, the park was intended to have a treetop lodge built high above the ground, where visitors could observe the pterodactyls at flight level. We've got 4 dactyls in the aviary now. Actually, they're the pterodactyls, which are big fish-eating dactyls. What about them? Well, while we finished the lodge, we put the dactyls in the aviary to acclimate them. But that was a big mistake. It turns out our fish hunters are territorial. Territorial? Fiercely territorial, Arnold said. They fight amongst themselves for territory, and they'll attack any other animal that comes into the area if they've marked out. Attack? It's impressive, Arnold said. The dactyls glide to the top of the aviary, fold up their wings, and dive. A 30-pound animal will strike a man on the ground like a ton of bricks. They were knocking the workmen unconscious, cutting them up pretty badly. That doesn't injure the dactyls? Not so far. So if those kids are in the aviary, they're not, Arnold said. At least, I hope they're not. Is that the lodge? Lex said. What a dump. Beneath the aviary dome, Theratok's lodge was built high above the ground on big wooden pylons in the middle of a stand on fir trees. But the building was unfinished and unpainted. The windows were boarded up. The trees and lodge were splattered with broad white streaks. I guess it didn't. I guess they didn't finish it for some reason, Grant said, hiding his disappointment. He glanced at his watch. Come on, let's go back to the boat. The sun came out as they walked along, making the morning more cheerful. Grant looked at the latticework shadows on the ground above the dome above. He noticed that the ground and the foliage were splattered with broad streaks of the same white chalky substance that had been on the building, and there was a distinctive sour odor in the morning air. Stinks here, Alex said. What's all the white stuff? Looks like reptile droppings, probably from the birds. How come they didn't finish the lodge? I don't know. They entered a clearing of low grass dotted with wild flowers. They heard a long, low whistle, then an answering whistle from across the forest. What's that? I don't know. Then Grant saw the dark shadow of a cloud on the grassy field ahead. The shadow was moving fast. In moments it had swept over them. He looked up and saw an enormous dark shape gliding above them, blotting out the sun. Yow, Lex said. Is it a pterodactyl? Yes, Tim said. Grant didn't answer. He was entranced by the sight of the huge flying creature. In the sky above, the pterodactyl gave a low whistle and wheeled gracefully, turning back toward them. How come they're not on the tour? Tim said. Grant was wondering the same thing. The flying dinosaurs were so beautiful, so graceful as they moved through the air. As Grant watched, he saw a second pterodactyl appear in the sky, and a third and a fourth. Maybe because they didn't finish the lodge, Lex said. Grant was thinking these weren't ordinary pterodactyls. They were too large. They must be pterodactyls, big flying reptiles from the early Cretaceous. When they were high, they looked like small airplanes. When they came lower, he could see that the animals had 15-foot wingspans, furry bodies, and heads like crocodiles. They ate fish, he remembered, South America and Mexico. Lex shaded her eyes and looked up at the sky. Can they hurt us? I don't think so. They eat fish. One of the dactyls spiraled down, a flashing dark shadow that whooshed past them with a rush of warm air and a lingering sour odor. Wow, Lex said. They're really big. And then she said, Are you sure they can't hurt us? Pretty sure. A second dactyl swooped down, moving faster than the first. It came from behind, streaked over their heads. Grant had a glimpse of its toothy beak and furry body. It looked like a huge bat. He thought. But Grant was impressed with the frail appearance of the animals. Their huge wingspans, a delicate pink membrane stretched across them, so thin that they were translucent. Everything reinforced the delicacy of the dactyls. Ow, Lex shouted, grabbing her hair. It bit me. He what? Grant said. He bit me. He bit me. When she took her hand away, he saw blood on her fingers. Up in the sky, two more dactyls folded their wings, collapsing into small dark shapes that plummeted towards the ground. They made a kind of scream as they hurtled downward. Come on, Grant said, grabbing their hands. They ran across the meadow, hearing the approaching scream, and he flung himself on the ground at the last moment, pulling the kids down with him, as two dactyls whistled and squeaked past them, flapping their wings. Grant felt claws tear the shirt along his back. Then he was up, pulling Lex back onto her feet and running with Tim at a few feet forward, while overhead two more birds wheeled and dove toward them, screaming. At the last moment, he pushed the kids to the ground, and the big shadows flapped past. Ugh, Lex said, disgusted. He saw that she was streaked with white droppings from the birds. Grant scrabbled to his feet. Come on. He was about to run when Lex shrieked in terror. He turned back and saw that one of the dactyls had grabbed her by the shoulders with its hind claws. The animal's huge leathery wings, translucent in the sunlight, flapped broadly on both sides of her. The dactyl was trying to take off, but Lex was too heavy, and while it struggled, it repeatedly jabbed at her head with its long, pointed jaw. Lex was screaming, waving her arms wildly. Grant did the only thing he could think to do. He ran forward and jumped up, throwing himself against the body of the dactyl. He knocked it onto its back on the ground and fell on top of the furry body. The animal screamed and snapped. Grant ducked his head away from its jaws and pushed back as the giant wings beat around his body. It was like being in a tent in a windstorm. You couldn't see, you couldn't hear. There was nothing but the flapping and shrieking and leathery membranes. The clawed legs scratched frantically at his chest. Lex was screaming. Grant pushed away from the dactyl, and it squeaked and gibbered as it flapped its wings and struggled to turn over, to right itself. Finally, it pulled it in its wings like a bat and rolled over, lifted itself up in its little winged claws, and began to walk away. He paused, astonished. It could walk on its wings. Letterer's speculation was right, but the other dactyls were diving down at them, and Grant was dizzy, off balance, and in horror he saw Lex run away, her arms over her head, Tim shouting at the top of his lungs. The first of them swooped down, and she threw something, and suddenly the dactyls whistled and climbed. The other dactyls immediately climbed and chased the first into the sky. The fourth dactyl flapped awkwardly into the air to join the others. Grant looked upward, squinting to see what had happened. The three dactyls chased the first, screaming angrily. They were alone in the field. "What happened?" Grant said. "They got my glove," Lex said. "My Darrow strawberry special." They started walking again. Tim put his arms around her shoulder. "Are you all right?" "Of course, stupid," she said, shaking him off. She looked upward. "I hope they choke and die," she said. "Yeah," Tim said, "me too." Up ahead, they saw the boat on the shore. Grant looked at his watch. It was 8:30. He now had 2.5 hours to get back. "Oh, I do? Thank you. Thanks, Bone. I did not know that." There's some pretty awesome people out there. But a lot of those people are from an accumulation for over 10 years. So I am definitely not as accomplished as some other really cool people out there. Let's see. I'm just going a little bit farther, and then I'm going to call it tonight. It's a work night. All right, where was I? Lex cheered as they drifted beyond the silvery Avery dome. Then the banks of the river closed in on both sides, the trees meeting overhead once more. The river was narrower than ever in some places, only 10 feet wide, and the current flowed very fast. Lex reached up to touch the branches as they went past. Grant sat back in the raft and listened to the gurgle of water through the warm rubber. They were moving faster now, the branches overhead slipping by more rapidly. It was pleasant. It gave a little breeze in the hot confines of the overhanging branches, and it meant they would get back that much sooner. Grant couldn't guess how far they had come, but it must be several miles at least from the sauropod building where they had spent the night. Perhaps 4 or 5 miles, maybe even more. That meant they might be only an hour's walk from the hotel once they left the raft. But after the aviary, Grant was in no hurry to leave the river again. For the moment, they were making good time. "I wonder how Ralph is," Lex said. "He's probably dead or something." "I'm sure he's fine." "I wonder if he'd let me ride him," she sighed, sleepy in the sun. "That would be fun, to ride Ralph." Tim said to Grant, "Remember back at the Stegosaurus last night?" "Yes." "How come you asked them about frog DNA?" "Because of the breeding," Grant said. "They can't explain why the dinosaurs are breeding since they irradiate them, and since they're all females." "Right. Well, irradiation is notoriously unreliable and probably doesn't work. I think they'll eventually be shown here. But there still is the problem that dinosaurs being female. How can they breed when they're all female?" "Right," Tim said. "Well, across the animal kingdom, sexual reproduction exists in an extraordinary variety." Getting ready for work? Hey, it's a good time to learn about dino procreation. Let's see. Where am I? Okay, here we go. Tim's very interested in sex, Lex said. They both ignored her. For example, Grant said, many animals have sexual reproduction without ever having what we would call sex. The male releases a spermatophore, which contains the cell sex. The male, wait, sorry, which contains the sperm, and the female picks it up at a later time. This kind of exchange does not require quite as much physical differentiation between male and female as we usually think exists. Male and female are more alike in some animals than they are in human beings. Tim nodded. But what about the frogs? Grant heard sudden shrieks from the trees above as the microceratophsins scattered in alarm, shaking the branches. The big heads of the tyrannosaur lunged through the foliage from the left, the jaws snapping at the raft. Lex howled in terror, and Grant paddled away toward the opposite bank, but the river here was only 10 feet wide. The tyrannosaur was caught in the heavy growth. It butted and twisted its head and roared. Then it pulled its head back. Through the trees that lined the riverbank, they saw the huge dark form of the tyrannosaur moving north, looking for a gap in the trees that lined the bank. Oops, sorry, got a folded page here by mistake. Ugh, there we go. In the raft, Grant, Tim, and Lex stared helplessly as the tyrannosaur tried to break through again. But the trees were too dense along the banks of the river. The tyrannosaur again moved downstream, ahead of the boat, and tried again, shaking the branches furiously. But again it failed. Then it moved off, heading farther downstream. I hate him, Lex said. Grant sat back in the boat, badly shaken. If the tyrannosaur had broken through, there was nothing he could have done to save them. The river was so narrow that it was hardly wider than the raft. It was like being in a tunnel. The rubber gunwales often scraped on the mud. It often scraped on the mud as the boat was pulled along the swift current. He glanced at his watch. Almost 9. The raft continued downstream. Hey, Lex said, listen. He heard snarling interspersed with the repeated hooting cry. The cries were becoming more beyond a curve, farther down the river. He listened and heard the hooting again. What is it? Lex said. I don't know, Grant said, but there's more than one of them. He paddled the boat to the opposite bank and grabbed a branch to stop the raft. Snarling was repeated, then more hooting. It sounds like a bunch of owls, Tim said. Malcolm groaned. Isn't it time for more morphine yet? No, Ellie said. Malcolm sighed. How much water have we got here? I don't know. There's plenty of running water from the tap. No, I mean how much stored? Any? Ellie shrugged. None. Go into the rooms on this floor, Malcolm said, and fill bathtubs with water. Ellie frowned. Also, Malcolm said, have we got any walkie-talkies, flashlights, matches, sterno stoves, things like that? I'll look around. You planning for an earthquake? Something like that, Malcolm said. Malcolm effect implies catastrophic changes. But Arnold says all of the systems are working perfectly. That's when it happens, Malcolm said. Ellie said, You don't think much of Arnold, do you? He's all right. He's an engineer. Lou's the same. They're both technicians. They both have intelligence. They have what I call intelligence. They see the immediate situation. They think narrowly, and they call it being focused. They don't see the surrounded. They don't see the consequences. That's how you get an island in this from intelligent thinking, because you can't make an animal and not expect it to act alive to be unpredictable, to escape, but they don't see that. Don't you think it's just human nature? Ellie said. God, no, Malcolm said. They're like saying scrambled. That's like saying scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast is human nature. It's nothing of the sort. It's uniquely Western training, and most of the rest of the world is nauseated by the thought of it. He winced in his pain. The morphine's making me philosophical. You want some more? No, I'll tell you the problem when engineers and scientists have an elaborate line of bullshit how around how they are seeking to know the truth about nature, which is true, but they're not with but that's not what drives them. Nobody is driven by abstractions like seeking truth. They are focused on whatever they can on whatever they can do something. They they never stop to ask if they should do something. They conveniently define such considerations as pointless. If they don't do it, someone else will. Discovery, they believe, is inevitable. So they just tried to do it first. That's the game in science. Every pure scientist discovers it an aggressive penetrative act. It takes big equipment and it literally changes the world afterward. Particle accelerators scar the land and leave radioactive byproducts. Astronauts leave trash on the moon. There's always some proof that scientists were there moving their discoveries. Discovery is always a rape of the natural world. Always. Need some water here. Whew. About to fall asleep myself, but I'm almost done. Whew. Want some water? No, I'll tell you the problem with engineers and scientists. Scientists have an elaborate line of bullshit about how they are seeking to know the truth about nature, which is true, but that's not what drives them. Nobody is driven by abstractions like seeking truth. Scientists are actually preoccupied with accomplishments, so they are focused on whether they can do something. They never ask if they should do something. They conveniently define such considerations as pointless. If they don't do it, someone else will. Discovery, they believe is Discovery, they believe, is inevitable. So they just try to do it first. That's the game in science. Every pure scientist discovery is an aggressive, penetrative act. It takes big equipment and is literally changes the world afterwards. Particle accelerators scar the land and leave radioactive byproducts. Our astronauts leave trash on the moon. There are always some proof the scientists were there making their discoveries. Discoveries is always a rape of the natural world. A rape of the natural world. I'm so sorry. Whew. The scientists want it that way. They have to stick their instruments in. They have to leave their mark. They can't just leave. They can't just appreciate. They can't just fit in. They can't just fit into the natural order. They have to make something unnatural happen. This is the scientist's job. And now we have whole scenarios that try to be scientific. He sighed and sank back. Ellie said, "Don't you think you're overstating? What does one of us overstating look like a year? What does one of your excavations look like a year later? Pretty bad," she admitted. You don't replant, you don't restore the land after you dig, no? Why not? She shrugged. There's no money, I guess. There's only enough money to dig, but not to repair. Just the Badlands, Malcolm said, shaking his head. Just high. Hmm. I'm almost there. Let's see. Where was it? Just byproducts, just side effects. I'm trying to tell the scientists what. Oh, damn it! Yeah, I'm trying to tell you that scientists want it this way. They want byproducts and trash and scars and side effects. It's a way of reassuring themselves. It's built into a fabric of science, and it's increasingly a disaster. Then what's the answer? Go get rid of the unintelligent ones. Take them out of power. But then we love all the advances. What advances? Malcolm said irritably. The number of hours women devote to housework has not changed since 1930. Despite all the advantages, all the women cleaners, washer dryers, trash compactors, garbage disposals, washers, and wear fabrics. Why does it take uh, a long why does it still take as long to clean a house as it did in 1830? Ollie said nothing. There we go. Because there haven't been any advancements, what Malcolm said. None really. 30,000 years ago, when men were doing cave paintings at Las Guns, they worked 20 hours a week to provide themselves with food and shelter and clothing to the rest of the world. They to the rest of the world. They could play or sleep or do whatever they wanted, and they lived in a natural world with clean air, clean water, beautiful trees, and sunsets. Think about it. 20 hours a week, 20,000 years ago. Whew. Man. Ellie said, You want to turn back the clock? No, Malcolm said, I want people to wake up. We've had 400 years of modern science. We ought to know by now what it's good for and what it's not good for. It's time for a change. Before we destroy the planet, she said. He sighed and closed his eyes. Oh dear, he said. That's the last thing I want. That's the last thing I want to worry about. In the dark tunnel of the jungle river, Grant went ahead overhand, holding branches, moving the raft cautiously forward. He still heard the sounds, and finally he saw the dinosaurs. Aren't those the ones that are poisonous? Yes, Grant said. Dilophosaurus. Standing on the riverbank were two Dilophosaurs. The 10-foot tall bodies were spotted yellow and black. Underneath the bellies, they were bright green and little lizards. Twin red curving potatoes ran along the top of Twin red curving red. What? How on earth do you even read that? Well, you know what? We'll just roll with it. Twin red curving crests ran along the top of the head from the eyes to the nose, making a V shape. V shape above the head. The bird-like quality was reinforced by the way they move, bending to drink from the water, then rising to snarl and hoot. I am laboring already. So glad I'm stopping very shortly here. Go, Lordy. I got this. Should we get out and walk? Grant shook his head. No, the Dilophosaurs were smaller than the Tyrannosaur, small enough to slip through the dense foliage and the banks of the river. And they seemed quick as they snarled and hooted at each other. But we can't get past them in the boat, Lex said. They're poison. We have to, Grant said, somehow. The Dilophosaurs continued to drink and hoot. They seemed to be interacting with each other in a strange, realistic, repetitive way. The animal on the left would bend to drink, opening his mouth to bear long rows. Oh my gosh! To bear long rows of sharp teeth, and then would hoot. And then it would hoot. There you go. The animal on the right would hoot in reply and bend to drink in a mirror image of first animal movements. Then the sequence would be repeated exactly the same way. Grant noticed that the animal on the right was smaller than the smaller spots on its back, and its crest was a duller red. I'll be damned, she said. It's a mating ritual. Can't we get past them? Tim asked. Not that way. They are now. They're right by the edge of the water. Grant knew animals often perform such mating rituals for hours at a time. They went without water. They went without food. They paid attention to nothing else. He glanced at his watch. He glanced at his watch. 9:20. What do we do? Tim said. I have no idea. He sat down in the raft, and then the Dilophosaurs began to honk and roar repeatedly. In agitation, he looked up. The animals were both facing away from the river. Whatever it was, Lex said. Grant smiled. I think we're finally getting some help. He pushed off from the river bank. I want you two kids to be flat on the rubber. We've gone past that one. We'll go past as fast as we can, but just remember, whatever it happens, don't say anything, and I don't know, don't move, okay? Raft began to drift downstream towards the hooting Dilophosaurs. It gained speed. Lex lay at Grant's feet, staring at him with frightened eyes. They were coming closer to the Dilophosaurs, which were still turned away from the river. But the river... What? This doesn't make sense. But he pulled out the air pistol, checked the chamber. The raft continued on, and they smelled a peculiar odor, sweet and nauseating at the same time. It smelled like dry vomit. The hooting of the Dilophosaurus was louder. The raft came around the final bend, and Grant caught his breath. The Dilophosaurus were just a few feet away, honking at the trees beyond the river. As Grant had suspected, they were honking at the Tyrannosaur. The Tyrannosaur was trying to break through the foliage, and the Dillos hooted and stomped their feet in the mud. The raft drifted past them. The smell was nauseating. The Tyrannosaur roared probably because he saw the raft. But in another moment, a thump. The raft stopped moving. They were aground against the riverbank, just a few times downstream from the Dilophosaurus. Lex whispered. Oh, great. Lex was long, slow scraping around the raft against the muddle. There was a long, slow scraping sound of the raft against the mud. Then the raft was moving again. They were going down the river. The Tyrannosaur roared a final time, and it moved off Dilophosaurus looked surprised, then hooted. The other Dilophosaur hooted in reply. The raft floated down the river. Okay, well, I'm definitely going to fall asleep for sure, on this, so we'll stop there. I think we did a pretty good job. Thank you for keeping me company. I'm really close to finishing this book, so I think we'll be finishing it on Friday, unless I spontaneously read again. Because I kind of want to start something new on the weekend and not at the end. You know what I mean? Yeah. Anyways, thanks to everybody who popped in to keep me company, and I really hope you have a good Sunday night and Monday morning, Monday too. And yeah, it's great.